Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined by all my awesome co-hosts this week once again. Laura Nash, how are you doing, Laura?
I'm so excited to do IFComp again. You have no idea.
Me too. And Nate Heininger, how are you doing, Nate?
Ditto.
And my bro host, Shane Kelly, how are you doing, Shane?
Likewise.
And this week, as Laura hinted, we are talking about IFComp 2017. So if you missed the last week's episode, it was an intro to IFComp. So if you're not familiar with IFComp, with the interactive fiction competition, I would recommend going back and checking that episode out first. This time we decided to kind of spin that out from our regular IFComp coverage, so we're not going to spend a lot of time at the top of this episode talking about what IFComp is or defining some of the terms you might hear today, like parser or twine, things like that. So if any of that sounds confusing to you, go check out last week's episode. It's up there on your feed, and we kind of explain what IFComp is for new listeners and talk a little bit about interactive fiction generally. We've also, by the way, done a bunch of coverage of interactive fiction in the past, including a episode way back in the 30s, I think. I have to double check the number. That is
the 1930s.
Yep, that is a intro to interactive fiction generally, and we've covered IFComp for 2 previous years, 2015 and 16. So if you're interested, you can go back and hear all of that previous coverage. I'll have some links in the show notes. But this week, we're talking about IFComp 2017.
Yeah, we played a bunch of games, and we're going to go sort of round table here through them, our first thoughts, and hopefully if you're looking for games to play for this year, maybe this will be a good resource, or if you're not even participating in it, we love it and hope that some of our love is infectious, and maybe you do go and play some of these IFComp games.
Yeah, the nice thing about this is we get to pitch games to each other as well, because we generally try not to overlap too much.
But I want to make sure that we're stating right off the bat that this is not a definitive list of what's good in IFComp 2017. There are a ton of games in the competition this year, and we can only play so many of them. We're trying to hit the things that we think are going to be interesting based on knowledge of the authors or based on things like descriptions and so on. But this is not an authoritative list of everything.
Or the randomizer.
Exactly. Yeah, we're using that randomizer button. So if you have played something that we don't get to in this episode, let us know. We're going to be continuing with more IFComp coverage soon with, talking about some more games that we're going to play.
That's right. Tune in, turn on, get lamp.
So if we don't cover today, it doesn't mean we're not covering it. And if you don't hear something that you really want us to cover, please let us know.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to make the first pitch for Eat Me by Chandler Groover, who in our Spring Thing 2015 episode, we talked a lot about Toby's Nose, the sniff, 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 Sherlock Holmes' dog, mystery solver.
Love Chandler Groover.
Yeah, his games, he's been really playing with what people in the community are calling a limited parser, which is you can generally just do, one verb and an action. So in this game, Eat Me, you eat things. You just eat things and eat things and eat things. And when I was looking for games to play, there was a blog called These Heterogeneous Tasks who said this game looked fucked up and delicious. That's a really good description. I also think it's super gluttonous and grotesque. And I think that, real quick personal story, when I was in children's choir, I sang a opera that had to do with cannibalism, and it freaked me out so much, like it completely disgusted me so much that I almost dropped out of the opera. So this game where you just eat things and people and objects, and it goes down in exquisite detail, is both for me and not for me. It is because I feel it so viscerally. And I don't want to give you a trigger warning for a game about eating things, but you'll get pretty quickly if it's completely going to make your stomach roil, or if it's something that you are so engaged with the wordplay that you're just going to keep going past the disgust. I kept going. I loved it.
I'm in it for wordplay.
Totally. I played this too. And Chandler Groover, I think, over the last, I guess, just couple of years, has become what I think is probably one of the most important authors of interactive fiction working today. He's done some amazing things. And I mean, in I think it was last year's, we talked about a couple of his games in IFComp. The thing that's standing out to me most in my memory is like Tag Hairn or Harm, which was this thing he wrote.
That was horrible.
I thought it was brilliant. It was but equally
the
horrifying.
cat murder game.
Right. It's a game where you're doing a really lengthy sort of ritual to, I think, the devil by burning cats alive. Very horrible to read, but the language of it was wonderful. And this is something that was really exciting when I booted up Eat Me, is that Chandler Groover does this style of like almost fairy tale, sort of disturbing, old-timey language that's incredibly well done. Like Eat Me, the setting is sort of a fantasy world. You're in a castle where everything is made of food, including, the inhabitants. But it has this very sort of like dark fantasy vibe to it.
That's a little Adventure Time to me.
Actually, yeah.
Well, I think it's less sassy than Adventure Time.
Yeah.
There's no breath of fart joke in this. It is very much, it reminds me of like Catherine and Valente books, these really rich language books. One of the best things I think about Eat Me in particular is the personal tone. It says, "All right, darling, you'll try that, my dear." The conversation that the narrator has with you on top of the language. And I think there's wonderful phrases like, "Didn't expect your skull to spin. Are those your own eyes bulging, or has someone swapped them for a larger size?" Like, it's magical, and I think the puzzles are just as good. I mean, it's pretty easy.
Can you give me an example of a puzzle that you can solve just by eating things?
All of them. I mean, the first thing you do is you're in a dungeon, and you do not know if it is a mental illness that is making everything seem edible, or if it is truly you're in a candy palace. They leave it intentionally unclear, but you have, cocoa manacles on your wrists, and there is a angel food cake door and a cheesecake doors, and you can eat all these things and all these people, and people have heads of lettuce, literally heads of lettuce. And again, the game doesn't say if this is your way of interpreting it, you're actually just eating people raw, or if you are truly in a candy world where you have a bottomless pit for a stomach and all you can do is eat.
It's like that. I'm getting kind of a Bugs Bunny vibe off of that, because remember when he was in that boat, and I can't remember. Oh man, Bugs Bunny. He thought some guy's head was a hot dog.
Good ref, bro.
Great, yeah. Deep cut.
Good ref.
Deep cut.
Hot refs.
To me, it's like there's a Netflix show right now called Raw about a vegan girl who has to eat meat during some kind of hazing ritual and then goes cannibal. That's kind of what this feels like to me.
It's cool too, because obviously we're talking about individual IF games, but wrapped up in this is just a general discussion of like the benefits and strengths of interactive fiction over other game types. And when you describe a game the way you did, I have a really hard time imagining something able to be like a candy world and also deeply grotesque using, video game graphics. So, language and good writing is really the only way to make someone feel kind of the way that you're describing.
It can go so much farther than Little Nightmares.
Yeah. To kind of extend that, like if you had the same story or same sort of story in a traditional non-interactive fiction, it wouldn't have the squick factor, I think, of you actually saying, "Oh, do I really want to eat that? Oh, I guess I'm going to eat that."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So reading a story about or a Wikipedia article about somebody burning cats alive does not have the same impact as having to specifically click to burn each cat yourself. Like,
or playing a video game even where you're playing like a first person thing where you're burning cats. I mean, I know that would be pretty intense, but like I think where you are, maybe I'd be speaking for myself here, but the visual like gross out medium is we're probably all a little jaded to that at this point. So this sort of like put it in your head by making you read it and making you read what you're doing is very unique, and I think a real strength. And not even just the gross out grotesque element, but anything. But I think there's a particular avenue where IF is strong.
Yeah.
Now, one more thing just to say how polished this game is. Even if you save and load, it will say, "All right, darling, let's resume the tale."
Yeah. A couple of quick things I'll point out about it too, just that stuck out at me. It has like a hint system in it. Nothing like amazing, but it had this detail that I think was a sort of a additional hint system that I really liked. At one point, you can find a library, and in it you can read a library of recipes. And every recipe, not everyone, because I think there are more recipes than there are like major puzzles in the game, but many of the recipes are essentially describing in this incredibly like archaic sounding. Like I once saw a thing where it described like the oldest recipe that is known, and it was in this like Middle English, or I think it was maybe not the oldest, but it was a very, very old recipe. And this read like that, but each one was essentially hints at solving the puzzles in the game.
Neat.
So like if you're really stuck and you don't want to just like read the walkthrough, fortunately it does provide a walkthrough, go read the books in the library.
Yeah. I'll say the walkthrough is super straightforward and spoilery. So I would say try the library
it's a walkthrough.
first. It's a walkthrough, but it is exactly what to do. It's not like a Grim Fandango style one where it's going to say, have you tried? Have you tried?
Yeah.
It is literally going to tell you step by step how to do it. So careful.
So Chandler Groover is great. Once again, unsurprisingly. And that's probably why it was the first game that I gravitated to on the list of games for IFComp 2017. What's next?
Well, I personally, so to go away from these parser-based games, even limited parser games, into the other kind of dark territory of IFComp, which is the twine-based or web-based games, choose your own adventure style games. I tried several really interesting ones this year. In fact, that's pretty much all I've played so far. The first one I'll just mention because it took me about 10 minutes to get the idea. And I know, Reagan, you also tinkered around with this one. This was A Partial List of Things for Which I Am Grateful by Devon Guinn. So I actually quite liked this one. I love short games, as you may be aware.
Wait, no.
And this game was extremely short, and it wasn't really even, I would say, fiction. I think it's firmly in the it's the first interactive listicle that I've found in this contest. It's basically a interactive game like toy where you're presented with one item at a time from Devon's list of things for which he is grateful. And what I like about it, the way you interact with it, is that every letter in every word is clickable. And so every time you click on any letter in any word in any of these things for which Devon is grateful, you're taken to another thing for which he is grateful, starting with that letter of the alphabet.
Oh.
And so you can do that and kind of explore around and navigate through his list of things for which he's grateful. And many of them are humorous and, kind of cute. So it's definitely worth the 10 minutes that it would take for anyone to explore.
Yeah, I thought it was cute too. It feels like a complete thing. So good for him.
Yeah, I mean, I liked that it was so interactive in that every letter of every word was separately interactive, and it felt like there was a lot of depth there. I didn't start to see a lot of repetition until I really tried to plug my way through it. So I liked it. Another web-based game that I played that had a lot more depth to it was the Unofficial Sea Monkey Simulator by BJ Best. Now, this is the first game that I think maybe all of us have played by BJ Best. Did anyone play any?
Not
I don't
that
think
I
so.
recall. Let me look him up.
So this is a new one on me. But I was kind of intrigued by this one because, first off, I like sea monkeys. Second, it sort of calls itself out as being like, hey, you're a kid in like 1987 and your dad brings home some sea monkeys and says to you, hey, you want a fish tank? Well, if you can keep these things alive, maybe you can have one. And so it starts off really just as a virtual pet. And we've all, experienced virtual pets at some point, probably. So and this was a pretty simple one. You can do a variety of different things with your sea monkeys. You can feed your sea monkeys. You can add water to increase the always dropping water level of your sea monkeys. You can reach into the tank and stir your sea monkeys.
Bad idea.
Yeah, that's what I thought at first, but turns out not that bad an idea. And so honestly, like, it's not super heavily implemented, but it's just like a bunch of meters that go down and different interactions. But that's what all virtual pets are. What sets it apart from a virtual pet is that it also has this sort of fictional element of the player character's interaction with the parents, and it actually has 8 endings. So the interesting thing to me about the game is the sort of overall tone. It's got this, what I really most reminded me of was like a John Darnielle song, John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats. In particular, it kept bringing to mind the song Hast Thou Considered the Tetrapod, which is a song about a young child who loves something, in that case his stereo, and has abusive parents who endanger it, basically. And
that is a fantastic
I realized that ooh was a really weird reaction. I just really love that song.
It is a great song.
It's not a woo song by any means.
I love the title. I've not heard that.
Well, you got to look it up.
If people like Rainbow Rowell, that's what they said. That song is basically the book Eleanor and Park. It's the soundtrack to that.
We're tying a lot of these games to songs. I wonder if that's a thing for us. But so the cool thing about this is that fictional element, but it also, I felt, had some implementation drawbacks. The story elements didn't feel connected exactly to the virtual pet elements. As you cared for your sea monkeys, some of the different endings, and I got like 3 of the 8 endings, some of the different endings would clearly come out of like how well you cared for your sea monkeys. So there was definitely a different ending for screw these sea monkeys, I'll never feed them, versus carefully caring for your sea monkeys until they inevitably dry up and die. But I mean, that kind of feeling of inevitable failure permeates the game a little bit, because as we all know, if you have had sea monkeys, it is impossible to keep brine shrimp alive for all that long, no matter what kind of special food you have, and no matter how rigorous you are with feeding them. The first time I played the game, I kept the sea monkeys alive for an exceedingly long time. But the second, third, and so on that I played it, they really started to go fast. Like I was saying, I didn't feel like the fiction of it, which I thought was good. I have two criticisms of the fiction elements of it. One is that it didn't feel mechanically tied to the sea monkeys, which I really would have liked. There was a moment where your dad takes the sea monkeys and puts them out by the curb to throw them away. No! And I was like, that would have been a great time to like really kill off some of the sea monkeys, but I was doing that on my best playthrough, and I brought those things back in and they were fine. So it really didn't feel like there was a mechanical tie between the fiction and the sea monkeys, or from the sea monkeys to the fiction. Like, screwing up the sea monkeys didn't really seem to alter the fiction. It felt a lot like the text that you would get was just sort of being doled out randomly from a stack of random pages of fiction. And that's fine, but it's not exactly what I would have loved to see. It was well written. The parents are painted in a horrible light. Uh-huh. They are both of the player characters' parents are terrible, and you can see why he loves his sea monkeys so much.
That's pretty interesting. I love when Twine games incorporate more sort of simulation-y elements.
Yeah, I don't know how hard that is to do in Twine. It seems like it would be pretty tricky. I'm not even certain that this is Twine. I'm not that well versed in the underlying mechanics and technologies and whatnot. But yeah, for web-based, you're often thinking, okay, it's Twine, and I know that Twine is mostly just like linked text. So I don't know how.
It can
I don't know how this.
can have some like underlying, logic and scores, and I'm not an expert either, but I've definitely seen Twine games do some pretty amazing, complicated, very gamey stuff. So but I do always sort of like to see more game. I mean, they're all games. I'm big tent on what game means, but I do like to see sort of more like game mechanics incorporated into Twine games rather than being strictly about like choosing story choices.
Well, this one definitely has that. And if you're in the mood to play something that's going to bum you out a little bit and occasionally make you laugh, then this would be a pretty good game for you.
Awesome. Well, the first game I played is a game called The Owl Consults by Thomas Mack, Nick Mathewson, and Cidney Hamilton. So I had a full team on this one. It's a parser game, which I kind of did the opposite, where as Shane is, where in the past I usually would do mostly the Twine games because I don't really think I'm very good at parser games. So I thought I would challenge myself a little bit. I get frustrated easily by being like, examine room. That's not the right word. Okay, examine room to the left. That's not the right word, where you have to get the language exactly right. And that can be a little frustrating to me. But I know these games are pretty awesome, so I decided to focus on that for these picks. And so the Owl Consults is a parser game, and it's really funny. You play as a character named Owl, who seemingly was a super villain or just mastermind in the past, who has now essentially retired to being a like superhero, supervillain help desk, where if there's someone out there who's in the middle of a heist or whatever, needs help, they can call Owl, and Owl will give advice, kind of walk them through the setting, walk them through what they need to do. So it sets itself up perfectly for interactive fiction, because I was trying to think like, this is not something that would work. At least I can't think of a way to make this work in a visual game where you're just like sitting on a phone walking someone through something, because you're not doing it. You're telling them what to do, which is perfect. So you're saying, look left, look right, like you're typing into a parser, and then you're not acting as the character looking left. You're the person who's telling the character to look left and look right and things like that.
Oh,
so
I see. So you're like giving them directions over the phone.
Giving them directions. It's exactly what it is. They've called, they're in a predicament, they don't know what to do. And your job is to type in, which is you are saying it over the phone. So literally the little parser box where you type in, it says line 1. Because sometimes you get other calls and you might take that on line 2 or line 3. And so you're switching between the lines, walking these people through how to get out of their scenario. So like, the first one, it's not a spoiler really. It's the first like 5 minutes of the game. It's a hero who can eat something, and if they take a bite of any animal, they gain that animal's powers for a short amount of time. And this character is stuck in a stereotypical cage, being lowered into a vat with a killer octopus in it. And they feel trapped and they don't know what to do. So they've called Owl to get assistance. And of course, for a very, very high fee. Owl does not just do this for free. It's a very, very high fee, which they, as the game goes on, you'll talk about your fee has now gone up by whatever, because the challenge is more and more difficult. And so the whole game is basically these people calling you with the predicament that they're in, and then it is your job to get them out of the predicament. It's really, really funny. All the characters are over the top. I really recommend it. There's puzzles, but the same kind of puzzle where it's like you just have to use the right words in the room, so like there was a bookcase. Well, you have to make sure that you look at the bookcase and find like the card in the bookcase that goes into the machine. So it's not really ever necessarily like solving anything. It's more like using the elements that are there their correctability, if that makes sense. Sort of old adventure gamey, but it's really funny, and I'm really glad I've been playing it. I definitely recommend it.
This looks really fun. Like this looks that's a wonderful premise, and it's really unusual to see a game made or crediting 3 people. Something that seems to be kind of like a standard for IFComp is that almost all of these games are the work of maybe like one person plus maybe some testers or that sort of thing. But this has 3 people on the byline here.
I mean, if I had to guess, and this is 100% a guess, you are dealing with sort of individual moments most of the time. And I could see maybe each person was in charge of a sort of situation, a hero's story. The person who eats the animals and gains their power. There's someone who is immune to radioactivity, and so on. So maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's just a totally collaborative effort, and they all work together. I mean,
and these names are all new to me. I'm just looking them up on IFDB, and it does look like the first one listed, Thomas Mack, has a couple of previous games listed, but the others, I'm not finding anything else by them. I think this is a new team.
Yeah, it's. I think they did a great job with it. It's funny. The language changes because it's very, very characterized, because it is almost entirely conversation. Even most of the room building or the world building is the person on the phone saying, I'm in a room with this. It has this, it has this, it has this. I've got my trusty blah, blah, blah. What do I do? And then you can give it back and you'd be like, shoot that. And it's like, okay, I tried, but it just, it didn't do this, or, hey, knock over that robot. I can't, I'm not strong enough. The whole thing is like a conversation. It's a really clever twist on like what it is you're doing when you're typing into a parser.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That is very cool. Yeah. I can't wait to give that game a try. That sounds really fun. And it also sounds like the kind of humor that I really enjoy in interactive fiction games.
Yeah, it's stupid, but not in the, like, I'm not calling it stupid. Like, the humor is stupid. The characters are so over the top. Everybody is, it's kind of silly. Silly is probably the better word for it than stupid, but you know what I mean.
Well, that's a good segue to a game that I played, and that so far may be my favorite thing from this year's IFComp, and that's the Wizard Sniffer.
Yeah, this is the one that I most wish I had jumped on when we were trying to decide who was going to play what.
I had so much fun with the Wizard Sniffer. This is by Buster Hudson, whose games I've never played before, although I looked back and he has a couple of previous games that I'm definitely going to check out. But anyway, the Wizard Sniffer, the premise, this is a parser game, so it's all text prompt. But the premise is that you are a pig. So this is by definition a limited parser type experience, because as a pig, there's very little that you can do. But you are a pig, and you are presumably owned by a knight who is going to save a princess from an evil wizard. And the evil wizard is a shapeshifter. He can take any form. And so he's brought along this wizard sniffing pig in order to help identify the wizard in the castle that he's about to go into and try to save the princess. So already that's a sort of a funny, fantastical premise. The writing of it is absolutely wonderful, and it has puzzles that I think this is a great game to approach for folks who are new to interactive fiction, because the puzzles are, I'll go ahead and say, on my level. I'm not so great with puzzles. And
geez, okay.
Yeah, so
your level is the level of a pig,
more or less. So you're a pig. You're only you have very limited verb set. So other than walking around, directional walking and just examining things, your only verb is sniff. You can sniff things. And also there's a hint system. So one other verb you have is oink. And there's a couple of special cases where it does give you an additional verb. But basically you're limited to sniffing things. So the puzzle action of the game is really clever. It's actually like fairly puzzle light, but you're being followed around by Sir Leonhardt and his Squire Tuck. And they are both fantastic characters. And Sir Leonhardt is incredibly enthusiastic. And so anytime that he's following you around, if you sniff something, he will try to interact with it. And so will Tuck. But most of the puzzles involve leading these two folks around. Sometimes you're leading them both around. Other times, one or the other of them gets stuck and you have to switch between them. So which one of them is following you matters for the puzzles. So, perhaps you walk up to something and sniff it, and Sir Leonhardt is following you. He will hit it with his sword, but he can't figure out things like if you sniff a button, he's too stupid to understand that he's supposed to press it. Whereas Tuck can't hit things, he doesn't have a sword, but he's smart enough to pick up on things. If you sniff a button or something, he'll press the button. And it gets more complicated from that. There's other characters that follow you around. What's really sort of, I guess, almost magical about this is that it has a ton of story content that is delivered in a way that, it's not utterly revolutionary or anything, but it's a really well delivered story for a parser game, because there's all these scenes that play out. So when you walk up to a particular area of the castle, a scene might play out where Tuck and Leonhardt sort of discuss the situation, and you get some backstory about them, and there's some funny lines. They make jokes. Maybe you solve some other piece of things out elsewhere in the castle, and you come back, and they're still talking, and a new part of the scene plays out. New characters get introduced, and it very seamlessly has these scenes play out that it just gives you a few paragraphs of text that drive the story forward. And you learn a lot more about these characters than you do about typical characters in interactive fiction games like this, I think. And the writing is hysterical. So I'm just going to read a couple of quick quotes from early in the game. I don't want to spoil anything, but I do want you to kind of get a sense of the kind of writing this is, because that was what really kept me in the game, even through what I would say is a kind of a draggy middle. But beginning and end of the game are real breezes and fun to play, and the writing is great. So just as an example, you walk up to the moat, and we're not able to get into the castle yet, and your only objective, your only verb is sniff. So I tried examine moat. One might assume the waters are only black in color, but the stench that rises from their depths hints at something much fouler, and so I sniff the moat. The moat is exceptionally putrid, so you pretend to sniff it. And then a quote, "The evil wizard is hiding in the moat," shouts Sir Leonhardt, drawing his sword, and with a mighty leap he disappears into the fetid waters, only to emerge a minute or so later. Tuck helps him onto land. He tries not to breathe through his nose. "What happened, my lord?" "He got away," says the knight, wringing black water from his golden tresses. "We shall let him savor his victory for now." Like, that was great. And that's like the first scene. One other thing that I want to just absolutely heap praise on this game for is its hint system. I mentioned that it's a game that's like on my level, and for a puzzle-oriented parser game to be on my level, it has to have a good hint system because I am slow. And so right in the first scene, there's a garbage heap. And if you sniff the garbage heap, a couple, which by the way is full of old puzzles, which is great. These two fleas jump out of the garbage heap and take up residence behind your ears. And so at any time you can oink. And when you oink, the two fleas will offer their opinion. But one of the fleas always tells the truth and the other one always lies, which is a brilliant way to offer a puzzle system here, because, if you're not sure what to do next, you can oink and the fleas will chime in and they'll give you two possible things to try, and you're never really sure which one of them is the way forward, which is a great way of really just telling you what to try next without it feeling like 100% gimme. Like it wasn't like going and checking a walkthrough. Even in the act of like asking the fleas for help, it was a little bit of a thinking moment to try and decide which of their suggestions was the right one, which I loved. It was a really, really great way to approach the puzzle system. So anyway, top to bottom, I loved this game. Totally give it a recommendation.
That really sounds awesome.
It sounds like a complete package of constant surprises and joy and hilarity. So that's awesome.
It's so fun and so funny.
So my next recommendation is not necessarily funny, but I really enjoyed it, and that's Harmonia by Liza Daly. And she did Stone Harbor last year, which was the fortune-telling murder mystery.
Oh, that was really good.
One that I played, it ranked 4th in last year's competition. And once again, she's using the same platform that she made called Windrift. So it has the same kind of feel. Stone Harbor and this game have this really cool kind of chapter system where each chapter unfolds a paragraph or two at a time. You can click on different words and they offer annotations that are usually in another font. There's literally like a little scribbled line to the side and the margin and little text inserts usually in different fonts or different people's handwriting as if like different people are commenting. And this whole game, Harmonia, is you play this replacement adjunct professor at a like weird female-only liberal arts college in, Yankee territory, they say. And you're taking over this guy's class who's disappeared on utopian literature. And you find out that the school used to be a utopian community. And mystery ensues. But one of the coolest things about this, the Windrift platform with the annotations makes it look like you're digging through different people's notes, where it's in first person. The author can comment on the work, or you can be reading a newspaper article and click on something and see someone else's annotation on the work. It feels more like this game has feelies than any other interactive fiction game I've played. There's lots of places where you're reading an excerpt and then a picture of it pops into the frame, and that picture can be annotated. It's really lovely. And I think that a lot of the jokes are, it'll say something like students are trudging up and down the steps to their next classes, and you click on the word down and it says, it was popular to arrange one's schedule such that each subsequent class was further downslope. Like the annotations are just kind of the things you think about when you're actually in a space. She mentions about, picking books authored by women because the former teacher was a dude and put a bunch of men on it. And they also start each chapter with a quote from a piece of utopian literature. So if you've never read any, I've read some. This was something I had interest in. But they pick little quotes from time to time as like those thematic chapter openers. Just like when you're reading a book, you might get a little quote from, Paradise Lost or something to center it. One line I really liked in particular, she mentions the first day she's teaching class, and she says, their undivided attention was disconcerting. I'd never led a class of exquisitely bred Yankee daughters. It's that kind of language. The mystery's great. I mean, I predicted it, but it didn't matter because that's not what the point of it was. Few choices, but the choices do branch the endings, so you actually do feel like they have weight. And I was drawn in because it does feel a lot like digging through a library and you don't know what you're going to find. Very much the platform and the way you play the game matches what you're doing in the actual game, which is digging through manuscripts, digging through archives. A really cool match and it's only an hour, so probably less if you read quickly.
Awesome. Yeah, I think her game last year was a little on the longer side, and I remember really thinking the writing was, especially good. But I haven't tried this one yet. I really want to give it a shot, particularly if it's a little shorter, because, what's the title of this show?
Exactly, and it is on the short side, and I found that really helpful because it felt more peaceful than some of the other games that. It's not a demanding game, but it is well written and polished and everything you'd want to go for. It just doesn't take as much out of you as, say, Eat Me.
Yeah.
Well, on my run of somewhat somber games, here's another Twine game that will make you sad. This one is
Great.
This one is Will Not Let Me Go by Stephen Granada. I really, really liked this one. This might be my favorite of the Twine games that I've explored so far. The overall story here is you are a man with Alzheimer's who is just trying to navigate his day and his relationships. And what is interesting about it is not only is well written, it feels very well researched, or perhaps this comes from some personal experience of the author, who's a science presenter and a robotics researcher, or so his Twitter bio tells me. I've never played any of his previous games. In fact, I can only find one previous game of his, which was a puzzle game set in a space station. So this is pretty different. But what I found really interesting about this is that the Twine style and the way it's implemented really lends itself to that sort of exploration of memory. There's a lot of things in the game where, you know, the character might be having some word finding difficulty, and you see a word that is wrong but clickable, and when you click it, he's trying to find the right word. It also, for a Twine game, has some. When I was going into this, I wasn't expecting any sort of puzzle elements, and they're extremely light. But the puzzle that, you know, kind of woke me up to that element of the game was just trying to find reading glasses in your house, which, you know, you're kind of fighting against his, you know, memory loss through that whole thing. But what I really, really liked about the game was the way that the interactions with other characters were written, because the main character has a lot of, you know, obviously is suffering from a lot of kind of challenging issues, and it really comes across in that writing. You have outbursts that you can't control. You have just obvious frustration, a little bit of paranoia. There's a moment where he's talking to his son and decides that his son stole his reading glasses. So I don't want to get too far into kind of the depth of the game, because it's definitely, it's about an hour's worth of play time for you. But if that sort of exploration of humanity is something that you're interested in, and what I found to be really good writing, even amongst some really good contestants this year, I would recommend checking this game out. I really enjoyed it. I just need to find something happy to play, though, guys.
Go play the Owl Consults. I think it might be the opposite of what you just described. That sounds so heavy.
Yeah, it was pretty heavy, but it was not so heavy that I didn't keep on clicking and really enjoy myself. So,
you know, something about IFComp is that, you know, I sometimes expect that the sort of happy-go-lucky stuff will just sort of, by the nature of humanity, rise to the top as people, you know, try to look away from dark things. But that's not really the case. The people who, you know, by and large, I think the people who vote on or judge IFComp are, you know, pretty well considered and are open to all sorts of experiences. And so, yeah, I hope I'm definitely going to give this one a try too, because it really looks like something that's probably going to rise, you know, high in the rankings here.
I have one more thing I'd like to say about this game, and just about its technical implementation. And this is going to kind of contrast with a game I'm going to talk about later. It's so important today for you, if you're making a game, to think about how saving is going to work. Because if you're making a game that is built for the web and is going to be played over the course of an hour or more, most players, and I'm just going to say me especially, are not going to finish it in one sitting. So what this game did very well is every time I opened it, it asked me if I wanted to pick up where I left off, and it picked me right back up where I left off. That is not common at all in my experience with web-based interactive fiction. Yeah. My experience with web-based interactive fiction is I try and load it up on my iPad. And this year I was really wanting to play a lot of this stuff on my iPad. And so I had a bunch of these tabs open, and I had more than one, you know, IF game going at a time. So maybe I'm pushing things a little bit, but I've got this fancy iPad Pro. And when I close it out and I close my iPad and I come back to it later, in some of these games, it's a 50-50 shot whether it will have taken me back to the beginning or not. And I guess that has to do with how The tabs are loaded in and out of memory, or it just clears my cache or something like that. I don't know the exact details of why, but this game was very good about saving my progress, everything that I did. So it gets mega bonus points from me just on that, and it's much more likely that I would finish a game that has that than one that doesn't.
Yeah, and don't leave it as a mystery either. This game, when you first load it up, specifically says, that this game will remember where you left off or something like that. It says so. With web-based interactive fiction, I often kind of don't really know, and the not knowing is like stressful to me. Like I want to be able to. That's why when I have the opportunity to, I almost always load these games into a with the parser-based stuff. I always load it into an interpreter because there I know exactly how the saving system works. And I know that I can save that save to a file that I can see on my drive or whatever. So yeah, that's a super good point, Shane, and super important. Most of these games are super short, but even with these very short play lengths, it's really good to kind of have that knowledge that if something happens and I need to leave this and come back to it later, I won't have to start over.
Yeah, I used Frotz for the first time this year to play some of these parser games on my iPad, which was very convenient because I spent most of my time nowhere around internet. But I had preloaded these games and I was able to play them wherever.
I love
Still
that.
a huge advantage for parser games.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Although, things like Twine games are really getting better with that. Although I think it is just some, it's a implementation detail that the author has to think about, and not all of them have the time to make that, a big priority when they're really just focusing on creating a good game experience and getting it in by the deadline for the competition.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you can see it's like some of these might be writers first and game developers, maybe second, third, or not something they would call themselves. And then some of them you see that you can tell they're really trying to play with the mechanics of what interactive fiction is and probably consider themselves like game designers, and that with a focus on interactive fiction. And on the topic of parsers, I played another parser, continuing with my attempt to broaden my horizons. And I played a really interesting game called 1958 Dancing with Fear.
A game with beautiful cover art, which I'm very curious how it pans out.
I really, really wanted to play this one, so I'm eager to hear what you thought of it.
What Laura's kind of mentioning is it's promo stuff sort of presents itself as like a film script. Or like it's an old movie, and this is, it has, the cover art looks like a film cover. It has like the who it's written by, the title's real big, and then it says a script by Victor. It's either Ojuel or Ojuel. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how to say his last name. But it's a really interesting game. There's a lot I really, really have enjoyed about it. It does a fantastic job of setting a tone and sort of world building. You play as a woman who is a former exotic dancer who has found herself wrapped up in a world of intrigue, romance, mystery. She's maybe a part of a revolution. You start to kind of learn more about that. Every scene is very lavishly depicted. It is a bit of I never know what to call them because they're not puzzles, but it's the same thing where it's like you're going into a room and you have an objective. And so it's just like checking the right boxes in the right order, if that makes sense. And the whole game takes place in one night where you are at a dinner party, or it's more like a ballroom sort of dance. And you're there with a covert operative, and you have to survive the night and complete your mission. It's really, really interesting. I went back and forth with the writing on it because it is very, I think I already said, lavishly written. And for me personally, sometimes it's a little over the top, but I thought I'd read a little bit of it. So this is, you're in front of the mansion. It says, The night is warm black velvet with cold diamonds up above, hanging over the broad silver swirl of the bay. On the other side, Puerto Duquesa burns with feverish yellow lights. To the north is the great house you're standing in front of, on the edge of a rocky cape surrounded by sea and jungle. So the whole thing is written like that, and it just does a fantastic job of setting the tone. It does cool flashbacks, kind of where the game takes control for a moment and steps away from parser and more just presents you with a story. You move between different scenes with these flashbacks. I definitely recommend it. It is pretty dense. It's all about this sort of world building. So if you're looking for something that's not funny, unlike the other one that I did, but really, really intriguing, I guess intrigue might be the best word for it. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, this was one of the first ones that really stuck out to me on the list here. It's got, sometimes a good bit of art on the game listing goes a long way, but so did the description, which really stands out, and I'm really looking forward to giving this one a try.
Yeah, you can tell he really spent a lot of time wanting you to feel a certain sort of feeling. It's like a dark, warm night and somewhere in like the Caribbean, and you're pulling off a heist or something like that.
And it also stood out because it's very high on the alphabetical rankings. Because
of course.
It's named 1958 Dancing with Fear, which puts it at second just below 10 p.m., which I can talk about a little bit in a moment.
Now, there is one thing I wanted to bring up with it too, and I don't know if I'm even the best person to talk about this, but the main character is a woman who is a former exotic dancer, and a lot of the game spends time talking about like how beautiful she is and how every person is staring at her, and she's like in prison for sleeping with too many men, and it feels a little.
Is it noirish or is it feel icky? Because noirish there's a weird thin line there between noir and like feeling like that woman is in an unsafe place. And
that's where I went back and forth, and why I almost didn't bring it up, because at first I thought it just felt kind of icky. But I do think it's in service of trying to give that same feeling that you get from those old noir movies. So I think that's what he was going for. I don't know, maybe I'm just really sensitive to it, but it felt a little maybe over the top with, just how beautiful she was and how much, and her womanly ways, that phrases like that. But it gets better as the world gets built. So I think maybe it was just early when you don't really know what the point of it is. It felt a little weird.
So also looking at the very top of the list alphabetically, just above 1958 Dancing with Fear, was another game that I played that was, I actually am not totally sure, it was a web-based web format game. It might have been Twine, but I think it was probably something more custom, called 10 p.m., which I think is totally worth checking out. It doesn't hurt that it's top of the alphabetical listing, which is honestly why I clicked on it. But it was a pretty interesting scene, I suppose. It has a sort of an interesting play style. You're playing as, seems like a sort of non-communicative 12-year-old who doesn't speak. It's not totally explained why that is, although he kind of it mentions that he doesn't speak anymore. But he communicates through signs, which might be sign language, but what it depicts it as in the context of the actual game is that he speaks only by assembling sort of icons in a kind of a series. So when you want to say something, it might give you a selection of different icons, things like a bird or a rope or an eye or a little picture of a head with a check mark on it and things like that. And it never specifically tells you what these things mean. It just sort of lets you start to try to understand this kid's language by giving you some examples. Some scenes will play out where you'll see the story of the game seems to be basically an evening in this kid's life, this sort of father figure person who is not his dad but is raising him comes home, and they have a conversation about his day. And so you'll get these scenes where this person named Ty is speaking to the kid, and the kid speaks back in signs. And so you start picking up on what these signs mean, and most of them make pretty good sense. The picture of the head with a check mark on it means like understand, that sort of thing. But some of them are a little bit harder to follow. And then mostly where it becomes really interactive is that then when you get to speak back to this guy, and tell him about your day, you're making choices about what signs to assemble and what to tell him. I don't want to, describe the whole story, but it has a sort of a theme of, like a quote from it that really stuck out to me was that the sort of father figure person, who seems loving but also really not necessarily the best place for this kid to be, says something like, just because you love me doesn't make me a good person, to this child. And it's interesting. It's definitely about like, well, on the content warning, it says profanity, allusions to sex and violence, and unhealthy parenting. And I think unhealthy parenting is kind of the key here, but it's a pretty interesting way to let you communicate from this unusual perspective of just being able to assemble these symbols. I think it's a kind of a stand-in for some sort of sign language, but it's not really explained exactly what that means in like, is this kid doing hand signs? Is he writing? Is he drawing these symbols? It's kind of unclear. But it's a really interesting way to play that out. And I thought it was well done. I guess just to kind of round that out with a few other of the smaller stuff that I played, I took a little bit of time just to try and play some things that had short playtimes listed. And the first one that I hit on was the Living Puppet by, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, so apologies in advance, Liu Zhan. So that one was this one was really unusual. It's web-based. It's primarily in the sort of choose your own adventure style where you're reading a fairly lengthy bit of text, and then it'll give you a choice, usually just two choices. In my playthrough of it, I played it through at one time. I really only had two choices in the entire length of it, and it's not super short. So it is a long time between your choices. It is pretty attractive. It's got this kind of, it's got full music in the background and sound effects, and it does this sort of background thing where the backgrounds are this sort of gauzy and blurred background images that change from time to time to kind of give you different vibes. The story's really strange. It's a story of a woman whose husband is some kind of a puppeteer, but he's unable to afford the sort of fine puppet that would make his career. And he then receives a living puppet from the teacher who was once his master, and you have to make some choices about that. The story is very strange. The choices in the game are really weirdly presented. So, for example, like you'll read quite a bit of the text. Your husband becomes distant after getting a new puppet, and it describes how he's become distant from you. And then you get two choices in that moment that seem like so it's just described how your husband is becoming distant, and he's not, he's going off and touring and doing puppeteer stuff. And then the two choices are become the living puppet to free Wu Sheng, or punish him for his unfaithfulness. And it's like, become the living puppet. What? There was no setup before that where you're deciding, like there's no explanation for that choice in advance. All you know is that he hasn't been home in a few days, and then it gives you the choice to become the living puppet. So it's giving you these choices that seem disconnected from the sort of in the moment of the text, which I think is a really strange way of presenting interactive fiction. Like, you don't usually read interactive fiction where you decide on page, page is wrong word, but like you don't really decide on page 1 about something that you won't find out what that means until page 10, but these sort of choices seem to crop up before the setup for the choice even becomes part of the text, which is really jarring and kind of weird. I also kind of got the vibe that this was a translation. I'm not 100% sure, but a lot of the text was strange in a way that had a vibe of being a translation, maybe from Chinese. That's my guess.
There were multiple games this year that were translated from Chinese. I don't know which ones, but I remember that that was a thing that people have noted. I think there's at least 2 or 3 games this year.
Yeah, it's
cool.
It's kind of weird. It's interesting. I'm glad I played it. One thing that I saw at the end of it, when I got to the end of my first playthrough, that I really, really wonder what it meant was, I got to the end and there was a message that says, "There are 1 people ahead of you." And I'm wondering if that means other people that reached the same ending that I did. Are they tallying that and letting me know? It only said 1 at this point. It also was kind of phrased weirdly. I didn't know what it meant, but I was curious about that. Actually, I think the idea of, if it is what I was guessing at, which is that it was kind of telling you how many people have gotten to the particular ending that you reached, that'd be a pretty interesting thing for things to do. So it's got some interesting stuff that it's doing here. It's just a very, I don't know, it's a very strange game.
I love the anytime you play a bigger game that is choice based. I really enjoy when at the end of the game they tell me what percentage of other players have made those same decisions.
Life is Strange style.
Yeah, Life is Strange, The Walking Dead. They all did those, and I really enjoy it. It's just kind of a fun little recap to go at the end and be like, these are the choices I made, and I am a terrible person compared to the most of the people, or something like that. And it'll be interesting to see if some of these interactive fiction games might be able to do something similar. Though obviously the budget is considerably lower. For
it has to have, I assume, at least a server side component for that. But it was interesting. I'm kind of glad I played it, but very strange. Also, one other thing that I played that was very cute, very small, and worth it for longtime interactive fiction, or specifically Zork fans, was Gru by Charles Mangin. If you've played Zork, you know what a Gru is. They're in Zork. It is a creature that haunts the underground, and if you stay too long in a dark place, it will come and get you. Well, Zork is a game where you're playing as a Gru, and your role is to eat adventurers. And what I thought was really clever about it, it's designed as a very small, short experience. In fact, you're limited to 16 moves maximum. So if you get to the end of those 16 moves and you haven't eaten an adventurer, you have starved to death. So you start it over. But what's very clever about it is that your eyes are useless in the dark. So it's all about trying to hunt and eat an adventurer using only your other senses, like sound and scent and touch. So it's a real short, cute little puzzle. If you like the idea of that, it's definitely worth a little bit of a playthrough. Kind of a neat little game, and really short for a parser game. You only get 16 moves. I went through it and died a couple of times, and then I glanced at the walkthrough and got over a little hump that I was on, and then got through it and ate me an adventurer. It was great fun.
Nice. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
I also played a short game, but it's not delightful, and it's not the right word for it. It's a witch ritual game.
A witchual?
Called a witchual, yes. Which is going to be probably my only joke in the segment. It's called
and that was even barely
Tuuli,
a joke.
I believe. It was barely a joke. It's okay.
Sorry, what was it called?
We'll round up. Tuuli, Tuuli. It is a foreign language word taken from a song by the authors Daurmith and Ruber Eaglenest. And it is a short little parser about you are a young girl who is training to be a witch, but is not yet a witch. And yet you wake up and the first line, your mentor is dead. And something bad is going to happen to the village, and you're going to have to step up and do it, but you do not know the full connotations of what you are going to do. The writing is very stark and atmospheric, and I had a little bit of trouble with the parser knowing what to do at times. I just wrote the hit help. It told me all the verbs I could use, and then I was fine. very much using language that I didn't think was intuitive. But once I knew the set of vocabulary, I knew how to anoint or kiss or rub, like words that you might not think of right away, work very well in context, but I needed to know the words to play. That said, it has the same quality of Yearwalk, where it feels very Scandinavian and dark and cold. You know, phrases like, "Old Maki is dead. She fell down the cliff," you tell him. "You must send 2 men who already have seen death's face to recover her body, and then you must leave me with her."
Wow.
Straightforward and very evocative. And if you want a meaningful choice, there are some in this game. Like, you have to decide if you're going to go through the ritual and keep opting to keep the ritual going no matter what happens to you. It's great. It's only a half hour, and I think that just type help, learn the vocabulary set, and play it through, because it really will take you somewhere. And I found it surprisingly moving and dark as hell in a great way. Huge surprise to me. Did not expect it, but someone said that they were looking forward to it. I picked it up. It was half an hour, and I ended up in a very different place half an hour later.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's I mean, short games in general, but obviously with short interactive fiction, like 30 minutes, it's worth it. If it sounds even vaguely interesting, the barrier to entry is so low. It's free, and you're reading. It's great.
That is exactly why I got into IF when I was young, because I had a Macintosh that was connected to the internet, and I wanted to play free games.
That's
There you
right.
go.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It was something that we could play on the horrible computers that we were still trying to limp along with in the 1990s.
My computer did not have color, but it did have a super slow modem.
Well, I think that's it for this week, but we're going to be back very soon with impressions of more games. There are almost 80 games in this year's IFComp. Far too many for us to cover everything. There are a lot of great resources out there if you're curious and want to see what's what before the close of the competition. If you go to the IFComp webpage, obviously you can see a whole list of all of the games. There's a great forum where I've seen some folks starting to post their impressions. So I'll try to have a link in the show notes to that. There's some folks starting to post reviews online, and we'll try to link to any of those that we see that seem particularly interesting. But if you have games that you have played or that you've seen or are interested in that you think that we ought to check out, we need your help. We can't play all 80 games. Tell us what you think is best or most interesting in this year's competition so that we can play it. We're going to be talking about this stuff again in probably our next episode, or at the very least the one following that. We're going to do at least this episode and one other on IFComp 2017 before the close of the competition. So let us know what you're playing. We're going to be playing some more stuff, and we're going to be back at you soon with some more impressions of more of the games of IFComp. So thank you for joining us on this episode. I'm Reagan Kelly, and you can find me on the internet at Reagan K. That's RAYGANK on Twitter. And of course, you can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find our contact form. That's a great way to let us know what you're playing or what you're interested in. Or you can find us on Twitter at _shortgame. Also, leave us a review on iTunes. If you enjoy the show, that's the only real way to support us. I mean, we don't do a Patreon or anything. So leave us a review if you love the show. We really do appreciate it. And I am told it does help. I don't know exactly how, but I do believe it. If you can take the time, please do leave us a review there. Shane, where can people find you?
I'm also on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And Laura J. Nash, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And Nate, where can people find you?
You guessed it, on Twitter at NateSTL.
And thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.